If you're innocent, why are you sweating? Officer Daniel Harper's voice cut through the noise of Terminal C like a blade through paper. The question was loud enough for nearby travelers to hear, and that seemed intentional. Conversation slowed. Rolling suitcases rattled across the polished floor before fading into uneasy silence. A few passengers turned their heads. Others stopped completely. In the middle of the security inspection area stood a black woman in a charcoal gray coat, her hands resting calmly at her sides. She didn't answer immediately. Above her, fluorescent lights reflected off steel railings and glass walls, washing the terminal in a cold white glow. Flight announcements echoed overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed. Yet inside the growing circle of attention around Gate 18, the atmosphere felt strangely still. Officer Harper stepped closer to the inspection table. A partially opened suitcase sat beneath bright inspection lamps. Several airport police officers surrounded it. One of them carefully lifted a sealed plastic pouch containing a fine white powder. Murmurs spread through the crowd. A woman near the coffee stand covered her mouth. A businessman lowered his phone from his ear. The silence deepened. "Looks suspicious to me," Harper said, keeping his eyes locked on the traveler. The woman finally spoke. Her voice was steady, almost impossibly calm. "Then test it." Harper's jaw tightened. He had expected nervous excuses, maybe anger, maybe panic. Instead, she stood there as though she were observing someone else's problem. The reaction irritated him more than he cared to admit. He glanced toward the officers beside him. "We'll do more than that." The woman nodded once. Nothing more. No argument. No protest. Her composure only fueled the attention gathering around them. Phones began appearing, one after another. Tiny screens lifted above shoulders. Travelers sensed a story unfolding. Nobody wanted to miss it. Harper noticed and straightened his posture. This could be the kind of arrest people remembered, the kind that earned recognition. Promotions didn't come from routine paperwork. They came from moments like this. Moments when instinct proved correct. At least, that's what he believed. He motioned toward the suitcase. "Whose bag is this?" "Mine," the woman replied. "And the contents?" "Also mine." More murmurs. Harper folded his arms. Interesting answer. The woman looked directly at him. Her expression remained unreadable. Not hostile, not afraid, just patient, almost as if she were waiting for something. That unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Behind the inspection table, another officer unzipped a hidden compartment. The room seemed to hold its breath. From inside, he removed a thick sealed envelope, several official-looking folders, and a black leather case. Harper frowned. Those weren't items smugglers usually carried. He took the leather case and turned it over in his hands. Locked. Heavy. Professional. "Open it," he ordered. "I wouldn't recommend that," the woman said quietly. Harper laughed. "You don't get to make recommendations right now." Around them, camera phones continued recording. The woman glanced briefly at the nearest security camera mounted above the checkpoint. Then she returned her attention to Harper. "Make sure every camera stays on," she said. Her words were calm, simple, yet something about the way she said them caused two officers to exchange uncertain looks. Harper noticed, ignored it, and smiled, because from where he stood, the case against her seemed to be getting stronger by the minute. What he didn't realize was that before this day was over, every camera in that terminal would capture a very different story. Ava Brooks watched the activity around the inspection table without moving. The terminal remained crowded, but the energy had changed. Travelers were no longer rushing toward gates. They were watching, waiting, curious. The black leather case sat beneath the bright inspection lamp, while Officer Daniel Harper studied it like a prize already won. The sealed envelope and thick folders remained untouched beside it. Their official government markings should have raised questions. Instead, they seemed to strengthen his confidence. Harper tapped the case against the table. "Last chance," he said. "Tell us what is inside." Ava met his gaze. "Documents. Important documents." "Very." A faint smile crossed Harper's face. "That is not helping your situation." Nearby, another officer carefully examined the white powder packet. He held it up to the light. "Still waiting on the field test." Harper nodded. "Good." The delay gave the scene more time to unfold. More witnesses. More cameras. More proof that his instincts had been right. Across the terminal, a television mounted above a sports bar flashed silent news headlines while sunlight pushed through massive airport windows. The polished floor reflected moving shadows from arriving passengers. Everything felt normal. Yet Ava noticed details others missed. She noticed the nervous glance exchanged between two junior officers. She noticed the airport supervisor quietly stepping closer. She noticed the security camera above the checkpoint rotating slightly as it adjusted its angle. Most importantly, she noticed that nobody had asked the most basic question. Why would a smuggler voluntarily travel with documents carrying official state seals? Harper finally picked up one of the folders. Before opening it, he looked toward Ava. You seem unusually calm. Should I not be? Most people would be worried. Ava folded her hands loosely in front of her. Most people know whether they have done something wrong. The answer irritated him. Again, there was no fear, no desperation, nothing he could use. It felt less like questioning a suspect and more like speaking with someone who already knew how the story ended. A young officer approached carrying a clipboard. Sir, airport administration is asking whether they need to delay the incident report. Harper barely looked up. Tell them no. The officer hesitated. They sounded concerned. I said no. The young officer nodded and stepped away. Ava watched him leave. Then her eyes drifted toward the large arrival board hanging above the terminal. Flight numbers changed. Destinations shifted. Time continued moving forward. Harper noticed the glance. Expecting someone? Ava looked back at him. Actually, yes. A lawyer? Harper asked. Something like that. The answer drew a few quiet laughs from nearby officers. Harper shook his head. The woman clearly thought she was smarter than everyone in the room. He had met that type before. People who believed confidence could replace evidence. Unfortunately for her, evidence was sitting right there on the table. Or so he believed. Then a radio crackled. One of the dispatch officers stiffened as a voice spoke through the speaker. His expression changed immediately. Not alarm. Not panic. Something closer to confusion. He listened for several seconds, glanced toward Ava, then looked away again. Harper frowned. What is it? The officer hesitated before answering. Sir, headquarters just called. Harper crossed his arms. And the officer swallowed. They are asking whether a traveler named Ava Brooks has arrived yet. The question hung in the air longer than it should have. For the first time since the inspection began, Officer Daniel Harper did not have an immediate response. Around him, the terminal noise seemed distant. The dispatch officer shifted uneasily, still holding the radio near his shoulder. Headquarters asked specifically for Ava Brooks? Harper finally said. Yes, sir, the officer replied. They asked whether she checked in after landing. Harper glanced toward Ava. She stood exactly where she had been moments earlier, calm and composed beneath the bright terminal lights. Travelers continued watching from a distance. Several phones remained pointed toward the inspection area. The scene that had started as curiosity was becoming something else. Confusion. Harper straightened his shoulders. That does not change anything, he said. Continue the inspection. The dispatch officer hesitated. Sir, they sounded urgent. Then they can wait. Ava lowered her eyes briefly toward the black leather case resting on the table. The corners showed signs of years of use. The handle was worn smooth. It looked less like something owned by a criminal and more like something carried by a professional who traveled often. Harper noticed the glance and immediately picked up the case again. You seem very interested in this. I am, Ava answered. It belongs to me. Harper examined the lock mechanism. Then maybe you should tell us. What is inside? You already have the authority to open it. Her answer was direct. No challenge. No sarcasm. Just a statement. Harper disliked how she spoke to him. Not because she was disrespectful. Quite the opposite. She sounded as though she fully understood every procedure being used against her. The certainty in her voice made him feel as if he were the one being evaluated. Nearby, the officer handling the white powder packet received a phone call. He listened carefully, then covered the receiver and looked toward Harper. Lab results are delayed. Harper frowned. Delayed? They are asking for confirmation before processing. Why? They did not say. Harper's irritation grew. Nothing was moving the way it should. The evidence was supposed to support his decision. Instead, every answer seemed to create new questions. Across the terminal, two airport executives appeared near the security checkpoint entrance. One of them spoke quietly into a cell phone while repeatedly looking toward the inspection area. The other seemed nervous. Ava noticed them immediately. Harper noticed them seconds later. What now? He muttered under his breath. The dispatch officer's radio crackled again. This time the voice coming through sounded sharper. More urgent. The officer listened, then his eyes widened. Sir. Harper turned. What? Headquarters called back. And? The officer swallowed. They said a reception team was supposed to meet Ava Brooks at the airport 30 minutes ago. A few officers exchanged glances. Harper felt the attention shifting. Control was slipping away from the neat story he had built in his mind. He looked directly at Ava. For the first time, uncertainty crept into his expression. Ava remained perfectly still. The fluorescent lights reflected softly across the polished floor. Beyond the terminal windows, an arriving aircraft rolled slowly toward the gate. Everything continued moving exactly as planned. Everything except the investigation. Then Ava spoke. Her voice was calm enough that everyone nearby heard every word. Officer Harper, she said, before this goes any further, you should probably ask yourself why headquarters is looking for me before I am looking for them. The words settled over the checkpoint like a sudden drop in temperature. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Even the travelers filming from a distance seemed to sense that something important had shifted. Officer Daniel Harper stared at Ava Brooks, searching her face for signs of a bluff. He found none. The confidence was not arrogance. It was certainty. That difference bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Before he could respond, one of the airport executives pushed through the growing crowd. His suit jacket hung open, and a security badge bounced against his chest as he hurried forward. Officer Harper, he said, slightly out of breath. We need to speak privately. Harper barely glanced at him. Not now. It cannot wait. Harper's patience was thinning. I am in the middle of an active investigation. The executive lowered his voice. That is exactly why this cannot wait. Around them, fluorescent lights reflected off polished floors and chrome railings. The terminal continued operating, but the inspection area felt frozen in time. Harper finally stepped aside with the executive. They moved only a few feet away, but not far enough to avoid curious eyes. The executive pulled out his phone and showed him an email. Harper scanned the screen. His expression tightened. Then he read it again. The message came directly from city headquarters. Subject line, Arrival Coordination. The name listed beneath it was Ava Brooks. Harper felt an uncomfortable weight settle in his chest. What is this? He asked. The notice we received this morning, the executive answered. We were instructed to provide assistance when she arrived. Harper looked back toward Ava. She remained beside the inspection table, watching quietly. The sealed folders still rested beneath the inspection lamps. The locked leather case remained unopened. Nothing about the scene looked different. Yet suddenly everything felt different. Why was I not informed? Harper asked. The executive hesitated. I assumed airport police already knew. That answer only deepened the irritation spreading through him. Across the checkpoint, the dispatch officer received another radio transmission. This time he did not even attempt to hide his concern. He walked directly toward Harper. Sir, headquarters wants an immediate update. Harper rubbed his jaw. Then give them one. The officer hesitated. They asked to speak with you personally. The terminal noise returned in fragments. Rolling luggage, boarding announcements, distant conversations. Harper heard all of it without really hearing any of it. His focus remained fixed on Ava Brooks. Something was wrong. The story no longer fit together. Smugglers did not arrive with official reception notices. Smugglers did not travel carrying state documents. Smugglers certainly did not have city headquarters repeatedly asking for their location. Yet Harper's pride refused to release the conclusion he had already reached. He walked back toward the inspection table. Ava watched him approach. You seem concerned, Officer Harper, she said. He ignored the comment. Who exactly are you? Ava glanced toward the security cameras mounted above the checkpoint. Then she looked back at him. I already told you my name. That is not what I asked. For the first time, a faint hint of sadness crossed her expression. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Sadness. No, she said softly. It is not. Then the dispatch officer's radio crackled once more, and the voice coming through was loud enough for several nearby officers to hear. This is Deputy Commissioner Reynolds. Put Officer Harper on immediately, and do not let Ava Brooks leave that terminal under any circumstances. The moment Deputy Commissioner Reynolds's voice echoed through the radio, the atmosphere inside the terminal changed completely. Officers who had been standing confidently only minutes earlier now exchanged uncertain glances. The airport executives stopped whispering. Even travelers filming from a distance seemed to sense that something far bigger than a routine inspection was unfolding. Officer Daniel Harper took the radio slowly. For the first time all afternoon, his movements lacked certainty. "This is Harper," he said. The response came instantly. "Officer Harper, I need you to answer one question before we continue. Is Ava Brooks with you right now?" Harper looked toward Ava. She stood quietly beside the inspection table, hands folded, posture relaxed despite the attention surrounding her. "Yes, sir." A long silence followed. The kind of silence that felt heavier than words. Then Reynolds spoke again. "Do not allow her to leave. Do not process any charges. Do not move any evidence. And whatever you do, do not open the black leather case." Harper felt every eye around him shift in his direction. "Sir, we discovered suspicious material during a baggage inspection." "I am aware," Reynolds replied. "The laboratory already contacted me." Harper frowned. "Then you know about the white powder?" "Yes." Another pause. "And I also know it is not contraband." The words landed harder than Harper expected. Nearby officers stiffened. One of them lowered his gaze immediately. Another quietly stepped away from the inspection table. Harper looked toward the sealed packet. Suddenly, it seemed much smaller than it had 20 minutes earlier. "What is it?" he asked. Reynolds answered without hesitation. "Prescription medical glucose powder. Perfectly legal. Properly documented." A cold feeling spread through Harper's chest. Around him, nobody spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. Boarding announcements continued in the distance. Yet the checkpoint felt disconnected from the rest of the airport, as though the entire world had narrowed to a single conversation. Harper swallowed. "Sir, if that is true, then why was she carrying classified documents?" This time Reynolds sounded almost surprised. "Because she was instructed to." Harper blinked. "What?" "Officer Harper, where exactly are the folders right now?" Harper looked down at the inspection table. "Right here." "Good. Leave them there." Reynolds's voice became sharper, more deliberate. "Those documents are part of an active administrative review." Harper's stomach tightened. Administrative review. The phrase carried weight. Serious weight. He knew that. Every officer standing nearby knew that. Slowly, almost reluctantly, his eyes returned to Ava Brooks. She met his gaze without triumph, without anger, without satisfaction. That somehow made everything worse. She had every reason to embarrass him, yet she had not done it once. Reynolds continued speaking through the radio. "Officer Harper, I am arriving at the airport personally. Estimated arrival time is 12 minutes. The terminal seemed to hold its breath. 12 minutes. That was all. 12 minutes until answers arrived. 12 minutes until whatever truth had been hidden inside those folders finally emerged." Harper looked around at the crowd, the cameras, the officers, the evidence table, and finally at Ava herself. For the first time since the inspection began, he realized something that should have been obvious from the start. She had never acted like someone trying to avoid an investigation. She had acted like someone watching one unfold exactly as expected. The next 12 minutes felt longer than the entire afternoon. Nobody touched the evidence table. Nobody opened the leather case. Even the officers who had spoken the most now seemed content to remain silent. The terminal continued moving around them like a river flowing past a stone. Travelers hurried toward gates. Flight announcements echoed overhead. Rolling suitcases clicked across polished floors. Yet inside the inspection area, time felt suspended. Ava Brooks sat in a chair near the checkpoint entrance after airport staff quietly offered it to her. She accepted with a simple nod. Her charcoal gray coat remained neatly buttoned. Her suitcase stood beside her. The sealed folders rested exactly where they had been left. She looked neither frustrated nor triumphant. She simply waited. Officer Daniel Harper stood several feet away, staring through the terminal windows toward the runways. A light rain had begun outside. Tiny droplets traced slow paths down the glass. In their reflections, he could see the checkpoint behind him. The officers, the executives, the crowd that refused to completely disperse. And Ava, especially Ava. The certainty he had carried earlier was gone. In its place was an uncomfortable question. What had he missed? The answer bothered him because deep down he already knew. He had stopped investigating the moment he believed he had found a suspect. He remembered the first moment he saw her. A black woman traveling alone. A locked case. Official documents. An unusual item inside a suitcase. His mind had connected the dots before the facts ever had a chance to. The realization sat heavily in his chest. A junior officer approached quietly. "Sir." Harper turned. "What is it?" The younger officer hesitated. "I reviewed the body camera footage." Harper frowned. "And?" "She cooperated with every instruction." Harper said nothing. The officer continued. "She never argued, never resisted. She even suggested preserving camera footage." The younger man's voice softened. "That is not how guilty people usually act." Harper looked away. Across the checkpoint, Ava sat beneath the cool glow of fluorescent lights, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She appeared less like a traveler waiting for answers and more like someone observing a lesson unfold. The rain outside intensified. Water streaked across the windows in silver lines. Somewhere beyond the terminal, a jet engine roared to life, then faded. The airport executives gathered near the entrance again. This time they were joined by several senior city officials who had arrived without fanfare. Their expressions were serious, respectful. One of them glanced toward Ava and immediately straightened his posture. Harper noticed. So did everyone else. No one spoke about it, but the message was impossible to ignore. Whoever Ava Brooks truly was, people in positions of authority clearly knew her name. The silence deepened. A clock mounted above a departure screen ticked forward 1 minute at a time. 11 minutes. 10. 9. Finally, headlights appeared through the rain outside the terminal entrance. Several dark city vehicles rolled to a stop near the curb. Doors opened. Men and women in formal attire stepped out quickly, shielding documents beneath their coats as they moved toward the building. Harper felt his pulse quicken. Around him, officers instinctively straightened their uniforms. Airport staff stepped aside. The automatic doors slid open. Cold air drifted into the terminal. And at that exact moment, Ava Brooks slowly rose from her chair. Every conversation stopped when the group entered. The terminal. Deputy Commissioner Harold Reynolds walked at the front, his dark overcoat still carrying droplets of rain from outside. Behind him came senior administrators, legal advisors, and command staff members from the city police department. None of them looked toward the inspection table first. None of them looked at Officer Daniel Harper. Every single one of them looked directly at Ava Brooks. The effect was immediate. A silence spread through the checkpoint that felt almost physical. Harper watched as Reynolds approached. He expected questions, explanations, clarifications. Instead, the deputy commissioner stopped a few feet from Ava and extended his hand. "Captain Brooks," he said. "Welcome." Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Ava shook his hand politely. "Thank you, Commissioner." The words landed harder than any accusation ever could. "Captain." Several officers lowered their eyes immediately. Others stared at Ava as though seeing her for the first time. Harper felt the blood drain from his face. Reynolds turned slowly toward the inspection table. His gaze settled on the sealed folders, the locked leather case, and finally the packet that had started everything. "Has anything been opened?" he asked. "No, sir," one officer answered quickly. Reynolds nodded once. "Good." Then he looked directly at Harper. "Officer, do you know who Captain Ava Brooks is?" Harper opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Reynolds continued before he could answer. 3 months ago, the city commissioned an independent review of misconduct complaints, procedural failures, and profiling concerns across several transportation divisions. The commissioner gestured toward Ava. Captain Brooks led that review. A ripple moved through the crowd. Harper felt his stomach tighten. Reynolds was not finished. Today was her first day assuming command of Airport Police Division. Several officers exchanged stunned looks. One airport executive quietly sat down in a nearby chair as though his knees had suddenly become unreliable. The commissioner stepped toward the folders. Those documents contained the final findings. He paused, including recommendations regarding officer conduct, investigative procedures, and decision-making biases. Nobody spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. Rain tapped against the terminal windows. The ordinary sounds of the airport seemed impossibly distant. Harper finally found his voice. "Sir, I did not know." Reynolds looked at him carefully. "That is the point." The answer struck with painful clarity. Ava had not announced her title. She had not revealed her authority. She had not demanded special treatment. She had simply arrived as herself. And what followed had revealed more than any planned inspection ever could. Reynolds turned toward Ava. "Captain, are you all right?" Ava nodded. I am. Do you wish to make a statement? For a moment, everyone waited. Cameras remained raised. Officers stood frozen. Even travelers lingering near the checkpoint seemed unable to leave. Ava looked around the terminal slowly. At the officers. At the executives. At Harper. Her expression remained calm. Measured. Professional. No, she said softly. I believe the footage already speaks for itself. And in that moment, nobody in the terminal could argue with her. The crowd began to thin after that, but the weight of the moment remained. Travelers slowly returned to their gates. Phones disappeared into pockets. Conversations resumed in cautious whispers. Yet inside the checkpoint area, nobody seemed eager to leave. The officers stood quietly as legal staff collected the folders and documented the inspection. The black leather case was finally returned to Ava Brooks without ceremony. She accepted it with the same calm professionalism she had shown from the beginning. Officer Daniel Harper remained near the evidence table. The confidence that had defined him earlier was gone. In its place stood a man confronting something far more difficult than an investigation. He was confronting himself. Rain continued tapping softly against the terminal windows. Reflections shimmered across the polished floor beneath the cool fluorescent lights. For several minutes nobody spoke to him. Then Ava approached. Not because she had to, because she chose to. Harper looked up as she stopped a few feet away. For a moment neither person spoke. The silence felt honest. Finally Harper exhaled slowly. Captain Brooks, he said, I owe you an apology. Ava listened without interrupting. Harper glanced toward the floor before continuing. I made assumptions before I had facts. I convinced myself I already knew the truth. His voice carried none of the authority it had earlier. Only sincerity. I should have done better. Ava studied him for a moment. Around them, several officers quietly pretended not to listen while hearing every word. Harper noticed, but continued anyway. You had every reason to embarrass me today. Ava shook her head gently. That was never the goal. The answer surprised him. Then what was? She looked toward the terminal windows where rainwater traced silver paths down the glass. Improvement, she said. Not humiliation. Harper absorbed the words in silence. They landed harder than criticism ever could. Ava rested one hand on the leather case. Officer Harper, good officers make mistakes. She paused. The question is whether they learn from them. Harper nodded slowly. The lesson was impossible to ignore. Throughout the entire ordeal, she had remained calm. She had never raised her voice, never demanded special treatment, never used her position to force respect. Instead, she had allowed actions to reveal character. Reynolds approached from across the terminal, reviewing documents with several administrators. Before reaching them, he slowed and observed the conversation quietly. A faint smile touched his face. Not because anyone had won, because something meaningful had happened. Harper straightened his posture. Captain, if there is going to be a review. Ava interrupted softly. There will be. He nodded. Then I want complete accountability, including my decisions. Several nearby officers exchanged surprised glances. Ava studied him again. Then she extended her hand. Harper looked at it for a moment before shaking it. The gesture was simple, professional, respectful. Yet everyone watching understood its significance. It was not forgiveness without responsibility. It was an opportunity to become better. As their hands separated, the rain outside finally began to ease, and for the first time that day, the tension inside the terminal seemed to ease with it. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of Airport Police Division headquarters, turning the glass walls gold. The storm from the previous day was gone. In its place came a clear blue sky stretching across the city skyline. Inside the main conference room, rows of officers sat quietly around a long polished table. Coffee cups steamed softly beside notepads. Computer screens glowed. Yet nobody was focused on either. Their attention remained fixed on the empty chair at the front of the room. Officer Daniel Harper sat among them, his uniform pressed perfectly, his posture straight. The room was silent enough to hear the faint hum of the ventilation system overhead. Then the door opened. Captain Ava Brooks entered carrying the same black leather case. No dramatic announcement followed. No introduction was necessary. Everyone stood. The motion happened naturally, almost instinctively. Ava paused for a moment, taking in the room. The faces were different from the day before. Not because the people had changed overnight, but because perspective had. She walked to the front of the room and placed the leather case on the conference table. Morning light reflected across its worn surface. For several seconds, she said nothing. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was reflective, meaningful. Finally, she opened the case. Inside were neatly organized reports, notebooks, and photographs from years of service. Not trophies, not awards. Work, real work, the kind that built trust one decision at a time. Ava looked around the room. Yesterday was difficult for everyone, she said. Her voice was calm and steady. Nobody interrupted. But leadership is not about pretending mistakes never happen. Several officers lowered their eyes. Others listened even more closely. Ava continued. Leadership is about what happens after mistakes are revealed. The words settled gently across the room. No accusations followed. No names were mentioned. No public embarrassment. Harper listened carefully, understanding that choice better than anyone. Ava glanced toward the windows where sunlight illuminated the city beyond. Every person who enters an airport places trust in us. They trust us to be fair. They trust us to be professional. Most importantly, they trust us to see facts before assumptions. The room remained still. A few officers quietly nodded. Harper did too. Ava closed the leather case. The sound echoed softly across the conference table. Respect is not created by rank, she said. It is created by character. Nobody wrote the sentence down. They did not need to. The room carried it in silence. Outside, a passenger jet lifted into the morning sky, climbing steadily above the city. Sunlight filled the conference room. For a brief moment, nobody spoke. There was only the quiet rhythm of breathing, the glow of daylight across polished wood, and the understanding that something important had changed. Not because a captain had arrived, because a lesson had. And as Ava stood at the front of the room while officers listened in thoughtful silence, the strongest sound in the building was not authority. It was the quiet presence of accountability, respect, and a kind of justice that did not need to raise its voice to be heard.